She's a Marxist. She's a fascist. They're scum. They're scum. And they want to take down our country. They are absolute garbage.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage in New York, Guy Benson, host of the Guy Benson Radio Show and a Fox News contributor. And in San Diego, Laura Fink, political analyst and CEO of Rebel Communications. Guy, when Donald Trump says that Kamala Harris and the Democrats are to blame for both assassination attempts because of their harsh rhetoric, and the media, much of the media, loudly proclaim Trump to be a danger and use Hitler analogies and so forth, is his argument fair?
I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair when either side does it. But what Trump is doing here is using the left's standards against them, or at least trying to hold them to the standards that the media often erects whenever there's any pretense whatsoever or any possibility of blaming the political right or conservative rhetoric for any sort of act of violence or threat. We get lectures about toning down the rhetoric and a climate of hate and dangerous words. And when the violence or threats flow the other way, the media generally does not apply that to the left. They're on the left, most of them. And the neat little trick that they're trying in the last week or so is to actually blame Trump's words for the violence targeted at him. So it seems like in a lot of newsrooms, the style guide is political violence, political threats. If it's going to be tied to words or rhetoric, it is always the Republicans' fault, no matter who the target might be. And I think that drives a lot of Americans up the wall.
Laura, you might want to respond to that, but we'll also, my point earlier, when Donald Trump says that these would-be assassins are shooting at him because of harsh Democratic rhetoric, again, most of these people, we talk about what's their motive, they're nut jobs.
And I think that's fair, Howie, and they're nut jobs with access to automatic weapons, which is also a huge issue. And I want to say that if I was a Republican and a Trump supporter and I had seen my presidential candidate shot at and hurt once, I would be disturbed and I would be upset. And I think you see that from that condemnation of the violence from the top of the Democratic ticket. I think you want to be careful here, though, because creating a false equivalency, when you look at a man who has built his reputation on division and incendiary language, and in fact sometimes overt references to violence. This is not, you don't need a fact checker to look this up. So I would say this, when J.D. Vance calls for it, if it is not a political device and it's a real call to tone down the rhetoric, the easiest way to create change is at home. So when he is asked about the 30 bomb threats based on his false allegations and condemnation of immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, he can do that right there. And I think that Donald Trump can do that too from the top of the ticket.
We will talk about that in another segment. But Guy, when Trump turns around and says the Democrats are a threat to democracy because they have been weaponizing law enforcement against him, and calls Kamala Harris a communist and a fascist who would lead us into World War III, by the way, isn't he being equally harsh amid all this finger pointing?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's very heated rhetoric on both sides. Only one side's rhetoric gets blamed for things like what we've seen now twice in the last 3 months. And I just have to respond to a few things that we just heard. Number one, I think it's important to be careful and accurate when we're talking about issues like firearms. These are not automatic weapons. These are semi-automatic weapons. That's a difference. Number two, the false equivalence, we can talk about that, but what we have seen, if we're looking at a scorecard here, is 2 assassination attempts against Donald Trump, 0, thank goodness, against the Democratic ticket. So I'm not sure that those arguments hold a lot of water given the actual real-world outcomes that we've seen, if we want to blame rhetoric, which I generally reject across the board. But this is the game both sides play at this point. And finally, I'm sorry, the bomb threats...
Is that the measure, though, really?
Hang on one second. Pardon me?
Go ahead, Guy.
I was just going to say...
I just was asking if that was the measure. If that was the measure, given the number of threats, given the tenor, given the tone, given the repeated statements over and over again inciting violence, including at the Capitol and against election workers. I'm just wondering what your measure is here, because I just don't think it's as simple as all that. And I think reducing it to those sort of simple tropes, I think doesn't advance the conversation. If we want to stop political violence, we have to look at it holistically.
Guy.
Right, and I'm trying to be even handed about it. I am saying if we are having a conversation about political rhetoric, we can note that one side's presidential nominee has now been targeted for assassination twice in the last 3 months. The last point